So on Sunday, we talked about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. And I told you that that one building is over the top of Jesus' crucifixion site and the site of the empty tomb. One building over both those. It's pretty close together. And I also claimed to you that we can know with a lot of confidence and precision exactly where that site is. It's not unknown to us archaeologically and historically. But I didn't have time to explain it to you, how we know that. I just told you you can either take it from me on faith, or I'll put a video out later this week to give you a sense of that. Well, that's this video. So if you want to have the Nerd Fest, you can jump in with us and continue this video, and we'll do that together. So the site was built, the church was built by Emperor Constantine in 335. Let's put 335 here. And you might say, well, that's a long time after Jesus' resurrection, because Jesus is like up in 30 here. So 30 is Jesus. 30 is the cross. 30 is the empty tomb. How in the world? That's 300 years later. I mean, that's longer than we've been a country. So there's a lot of things that'd be so confusing. How would we have any kind of confidence that a certain location is the right location? But it's not that way. Let me fill in some gaps for you. So 40 years after Jesus' crucifixion and Jesus' resurrection, you had the first siege of Jerusalem, a rebellion by the Jews of Jerusalem. One little sideline story. This is when the temple was destroyed. This is when much of the city was destroyed. It was a pretty vicious attack, instigated initially in 66 by Nero, the emperor, and then later by Vespasian, who led the siege in 66 and then came back as the emperor and was there to destroy it in 70. An interesting little tidbit of this. You can Google this for more detail if you want. But we know from a historian named Hegesippus, also Josephus, that in 66, the Jews had brought James, Jesus' brother, half-brother, technically, into the city. The Christian population was surging in Jerusalem, and they were really worried that Passover would be a problem. So they go to James, who's kind of the pastor of the Jerusalem church, and they said, James, we want you to settle the people down. So they got him up on the temple. There was like a portico over to the outside of the Temple Mount where they would have some shade to teach under. But you could stand up on top of that, likely the place that Jesus stood up on top when they said, this is the man that we're putting before you to be crucified. And they said, let him go, and no, crucify him, all that. That all happened probably in that portico. So they brought James up on there, and James began, they told James, hey, tell him that Jesus is not really legitimate and to settle down with all this Christian stuff. Instead, James uses an opportunity to preach the gospel. So all these thousands of people who had come to the Passover 36 years after Jesus' crucifixion, he gets all their attention and he tells them about Jesus. Well, it freaks the Jewish leaders out so much, they shove him off that portico. He falls a great distance, lands on the masonry, rock ground, breaks his legs. He was an older man at this point. Begins to kind of get himself up on his leg and begins to preach the gospel again to the crowd who was on looking. And so they came up with a stick and smacked him in the head, and that killed him. And Hegesippus tells us that at James's martyrdom, the Jews got so wound up, and the Christians in there got so wound up, there's so much tension that the Romans began the siege that ended up in 70 AD. Just a cool story. You can look at that later. So then, but at the end of 70, they destroyed the temple, but they kind of left the city in place. They didn't make all the Jews leave. They didn't change the name. They didn't make Judaism or Christianity illegal. It wasn't any of those kind of things. They just kind of cleared out the city. Well, in 135, there was another revolt. It's called the Bar Kokhba revolt, because a guy named Simon Bar Kokhba was the one who led that. And Hadrian was the emperor at this point. And when Hadrian had this revolt, he said, I've had enough. And he comes in not only to destroy the city, but to wipe out Christianity. So Hadrian comes in 135, the second Jerusalem revolt. And he says, I'm going to put an end to all of this. So he changes the name of the city. He calls it Aelia Capitolina. Aelia was a family name for Hadrian. Capitolina was a reference to Jupiter, the Roman god. So Aelia Capitolina, they named Jerusalem that. he was saying this is Hadrian's city dedicated to Jupiter. So he's changing the name of that. They changed the name of the area. It's no longer Judea or Israel. They changed the name to Palestine. Still a name that we employ today. That all happened from the 135 revolt. And he said, no longer are the Jews going to be allowed to live here. He made them all leave, ran them all out of town. And he said, all of this Jesus stuff's got to go away too. So this is about 100 years after the crucifixion, right? So for perspective, the Civil War was 150 years ago for us. We can tell you sites in Spring Hill, Franklin, where Civil War battles happened and where generals stayed. And all, we have a lot of precision 150 years down the road. This was much closer, 100 years down the road. They would have known people who knew people who were still alive and all those kind of things. I mean, this is close. And so in 135, Hadrian goes in and says, okay, they celebrate his birth in Bethlehem. They had a little shrine there where they would gather to honor Jesus' birth in Bethlehem. So he comes in, puts a temple to Jupiter on that site. And he goes to the place for his boyhood home. And he says, all right, put a temple to Jupiter on that site where they would worship Jesus' boyhood home. And the side of the cross and the side of the empty tomb, he put a temple to Jupiter over that spot to say, we're going to wipe all this out. Several key miracle sites from Jesus, he put temples to Jupiter all over the area to try to wipe out, to secularize the whole region. Okay, we fast forward ahead. In 313 AD, you have a guy named Constantine who becomes a Christian. Constantine was the emperor in 313. He becomes a Christian and passes the Edict of Milan in 313, which says now Christianity is not only illegal to persecute Christians, because for several hundred years they had a terrible time, but it also becomes the official Roman religion in 313. Fast forward a little further, now in 326, there's a lady named Helena. Helena is Constantine's mom. Helena led Constantine to Christ. She'd been a Christian before that. And she has Roman money because her son's the emperor. And she says, I want to go on a pilgrimage back to the Holy Lands. So she takes Roman money, takes some authority, takes some servants from Constantine, and she goes back to the Holy Lands. And she says, we're going to establish some Christian things. And she knows where Jesus is born because Hadrian built a temple to Jupiter there. And she knows where Jesus' boyhood home was because Hadrian built a temple to Jupiter there. And she knows where Jesus was crucified and where the empty tomb was because there's a temple to Jupiter right there. So in 326, she goes back and rechanges all those sites and now makes them Christian sites. And they began to build this Church of the Holy Sepulchre, finished it in 335 AD. But we have lots of confidence of when it was at the right location because Hadrian, back in 135, said, let me mark this for you so that years later you'll know exactly where it is. So within the couple lifetimes, people who knew people would have still been alive. They marked all these sites where they had been venerating the ministry and life of Jesus, and all of that thing came through to 335. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre has been built and rebuilt now several times over the years with wars and conflict, but it's still the same location. We know where it was. When I was there a couple years ago, they have a spot where they would put the boards in for the crucifixions. They had a spot in the bedrock they'd hewn out. And they're pretty confident that's the spot that Jesus' cross would have gone into. I put my hand down in and felt that spot. I walked to the tomb. We know where the tomb is that Jesus borrowed for a couple of days. If you go, and I'm going to take you one of these days when this whole mess settles down, when you go, you're going to see with even skeptical eyes that this is based on history. It's really real. Jesus was really a man. We know where he lived and served and ministered, did miraculous things. And we can have a lot of confidence in our faith because of things like this. Have a good week. Thank you. Talk to you later.